Episode 3 is where the living current stops being an idea you contemplate and becomes something you handle. Up to this point, you can understand symbols, spirits, structures, even metaphysics, and still remain essentially unchanged. Knowledge alone does not move the current, charge does. This episode is about how charge is generated, why it works, and how different methods reach the same underlying mechanism through very different doors. The first thing that needs to be cleared away is the vague, sentimental language that often surrounds energy. In the living current, charge is not treated as a poetic abstraction. It is a measurable shift in state. When charge is raised, something real happens in the body, the mind, and the symbolic field they are embedded in. Attention sharpens or dissolves, sensation intensifies or drops away. Time warps, the sense of self loosens. These are not side effects, they are the mechanism. Raising the current means pushing yourself out of your habitual equilibrium and holding that altered state long enough for intention to imprint itself. The current moves when the system is destabilized. Stability is death to magic. Habit is inertia. Charge is the deliberate creation of instability in a controlled direction. There are three broad strategies humans have always used to do this. They appear very different on the surface, but they all aim at the same threshold, overwhelming the ordinary filters that keep perception narrow and predictable. These strategies are ecstasy, stillness, and mediation through tools or systems. None of them is superior. What matters is whether they produce charge for you. Ecstatic methods work by excess. They overload the system until the ordinary mind gives up. Dance is one of the most ancient and reliable ways of doing this. Not aesthetic dance, or not performance, but sustained, repetitive movement that consumes attention completely. When the body moves rhythmically for long enough, thought fragments, breath changes, muscles burn. At a certain point, you are no longer doing the movement, it is happening to you. That moment is the doorway. The current rides momentum. This is what we might call spontaneous dance. Chanting and vocalization work the same way. Repetition erodes meaning. Words become sound. Sound becomes vibration. Vibration becomes pressure inside the chest and skull. The intellect tries to hold on at first, analyzing pronunciation, wondering if it's being done correctly. Eventually, it gets tired. When that happens, sound bypasses language and goes straight into the nervous system. This is why mantras work even when the practitioner doesn't believe in them. Belief is not the engine, saturation is. Drumming, clapping, stamping, and repetitive noise exploit the same principle. Rhythm entrains the brain. The body wants to synchronize. Once synchronized, it becomes easier to push intensity upward. Ecstatic traditions understood this intuitively. They weren't interested in calm, they were interested in rupture. The god arrives when the container cracks. And then sexual arousal is another classic ecstatic method, the one that is deeply misunderstood. It's not about indulgence or fantasy, it's about building physiological charge and then interrupting its usual release pattern. Orgasm is not the goal, tension is. Prolonged arousal alters breathing, focus, muscle tone, and perception. If that tension is redirected rather than discharged, it becomes a powerful carrier wave for intention. This is why sexual magic fails when it collapses into gratification. Release ends the current. Pain and endurance operate at the same threshold, but from a harsher angle. Cold, heat, fasting, prolonged stillness, exhaustion. These strip away comfort and force the mind into the present moment. Used intelligently, they can generate enormous charge. Used stupidly, they just damage the body. The living current is not interested in self-harm masquerading as depth. The question is always the same. Does this method push you into a state where intention can take hold? Ecstatic methods are effective, but they are volatile. They tend to overshoot. They can be difficult to aim. This is where meditative methods come in, not as opposites, but as precision tools. Meditative charge is created through subtraction rather than excess. Instead of overwhelming the system, you starve it. Sensory input is reduced, movement is minimized, breath is slowed or controlled. Thought is allowed to settle. The mind gets tired of narrating when nothing responds. At first glance, this seems like the opposite of ecstasy, but the endpoint is remarkably similar. The deep stillness, the sense of self loosens just as surely as it does in frenzy. The difference is texture. Ecstasy explodes the boundaries outward, meditation dissolves them inward. Breathwork sits at the intersection of these two. Breath is one of the few bodily processes that is both automatic and voluntary. Alter it, and you alter consciousness directly. Rapid breathing can induce lightheadedness, tingling, emotional release, and visionary states. Slow, deep breathing can create intense focus, internal pressure, and a sense of expansion. Breathwork raises charge by manipulating oxygen, carbon dioxide, and the vagus nerve. This is not mystical language, it is physiology pressed into magical service. Sensory deprivation is another subtractive method. Darkness, silence, isolation. When the brain is deprived of external input, it turns inward. Hallucination is not a malfunction, it is the system attempting to generate stimulation. This internal generation is fertile ground for magic. Symbols emerge unprompted, memories surface, the boundary between imagination and perception thins. Intention, introduced at this point, has very little resistance. The third strategy is mediation through tools and systems. This is where the current is not raised directly in the body or mind, but conducted through something else. Humans have always known that certain forms can hold shape and concentrate charge more reliably than the naked will. Talismans, sigils, vessels, fetishes, icons, temples, and ritual tools are not decorations, they are intermediaries. They carry the current when the practitioner cannot or should not hold it alone. Mediated charge works because symbols stabilize intensity, where ecstatic and meditative methods rely on fleeting internal states. Mediated systems give charge somewhere to reside. A sigil drawn on parchment, a stone marked and fed, a blade consecrated through repeated rites. These become reservoirs. The act of making them is only the beginning. Their power grows through use, repetition, and relationship. Attention returns to them again and again, and each return adds another layer of charge. Ritual itself is a mediating system. Fixed words, gestures, timing, the spatial arrangements create predictable pathways for the current to move. This predictability is not limitation, it is leverage. When the body knows what comes next, the mind steps aside more easily. The current flows along grooves worn by repetition. This is why inherited rites work even when their symbolism is only partially understood. The system carries charge beyond conscious comprehension. Objects mediate not because they are inert, but because they are stable. A candle flame does not argue with you. A circle does not doubt. A marked symbol does not interrupt itself each time you look at it. Stability allows charge to accumulate without constant effort. This is why magical traditions place so much emphasis on care, feeding, cleansing, and storage. A neglected tool leaks. A tended one deepens. Sacred space is mediation on a larger scale. A room, a grove, a threshold, or an altar becomes a standing wave of current. Entering it alters state without deliberate effort. Over time, the space itself begins to do the work. This is not psychological priming alone, it is the result of repeated charge being raised, released, and anchored in the same place. The land remembers, walls remember, floors remember. Names are also mediating tools. Divine names, spirit names, secret names. These function as handles on the current. Spoken or inscribed under charge, they stabilize contact and constrain excess. This is why names are guarded, layered, or given conditionally. To name is to mediate. To withhold a name is to prevent uncontrolled flow. Mediated systems excel at continuity. Ecstasy flares and burns out. Stillness deepens and dissolves. A well-built magical system persists. It carries charge forward across days, months, even generations. This persistence is power, and it is also risk. Anything that holds charge can distort if poorly constructed or improperly maintained. The current will continue to move through the system even when the original intention has been forgotten. This is why mediation demands responsibility. Tools must be designed, consecrated, and eventually dismantled with care. Ending a working matters as much as beginning it. A system left running without attention does not remain neutral, it becomes erratic. The living current does not punish mistakes, but it does expose them. Mediating magic is often quieter than ecstatic work and less dramatic than deep trance, but it is no less potent. It is the architecture that allows the current to flow when the practitioner is tired, distracted, or absent. It is how magic survives beyond a single moment of intensity. Across all these methods, the underlying mechanics are the same. Charge builds when ordinary cognition is disrupted. It peaks when identity softens. It releases when intention is impressed and allowed to move outward. The mistake most practitioners make is trying to hold onto charge. Charge is not meant to be hoarded, it is meant to flow. This is where philosophy matters. In the living current, you are not a battery, you are a conduit. Your job is not to accumulate energy endlessly, but to open pathways for it to move through you and into form. Obsession with personal power collapses the circuit. The current moves best when it is allowed to circulate. Another common error is confusing intensity with effectiveness. More sensation does not automatically mean more charge. If your nervous system is overwhelmed to the point of dissociation, the signal is lost. The art is in riding the edge, intense enough to destabilize, contained enough to aim. Intentional release is as important as raising charge. This is where sigils, spoken words, gestures, or decisions come in. At the peak of charge, the mind is plastic. Symbols sink deep. Decisions made here carry disproportionate weight. This is why vows, oaths, and initiations work. They are made under charge. After release, grounding is not optional. The body must return to baseline. Eat, drink water, touch something solid. Ignore this and the charge leaks unpredictably, often into anxiety, obsession, or exhaustion. The current punishes negligence, not malice. Over time, you will notice something important. The distinction between methods start to blur. Dance becomes meditation, stillness becomes ecstatic, technology becomes ritual. This is not confusion, it is integration. You are learning the feel of charge itself, independent of technique. Eventually, raising the current stops being an event and becomes a skill you can access deliberately. A breath, a shift of posture, a focus of attention. This is not enlightenment, it is competence. Quiet, glamorous, and transformative. This episode of The Living Current was not about telling you which method to use. It was about making you honest about whether your practice actually generates charge. If it doesn't change your state, it doesn't matter how traditional, aesthetic, or well-sourced it is. The current does not respond to sincerity alone, it responds to movement. In next month's episode, we're going to look at what happens once the current is raised and released, how it interacts with symbols, spirits, and structures beyond the self. But none of that matters if you cannot make the current rise. This is the gate. Everything else waits on the other side.